Hello and welcome to the Kick in the Creatives podcast, hosted by myself, Sandra Busby, and my fellow creative Tara Roskell, offering you interviews, inspiration, motivation, and a gentle prod in the right direction. And for lots more information, challenges, and other useful tools to help you get creating, you can go to www.kickinthecreatives.com. And of course, this is where you can also find today's show notes. Enjoy the show.
Today's guest is illustrator and urban sketcher Lynne Chapman. Lynne has had a fascinating career and lots of tips to share if you're an aspiring illustrator. But what made us reach out to Lynne was her amazing urban sketching. As you may know, Sandra and I are both working on improving our sketching on location. And whenever I'd Google urban sketching tips, Lynne's name would pop up. So if you're interested in illustration or urban sketching, I think you're really going to enjoy this interview.
I agree, she was absolute joy to talk to. Just a quick extra note to let people know that the sound may not be quite what it normally is. That's because we were recording on a day that was probably about 100 degrees hotter than the sun, and we were all sweltering, so we did have to remove a bit of fan noise from the background. So apologies if anyone thinks the sound is not quite what it usually is, but enjoy the interview. So, well, first of all, Lynne, we are so happy to have you on today. We've been really looking forward to chatting to you. And we would love to know, first of all, when did your love for drawing begin?
Well, I'm pretty much, I'm told by my mum anyway, that I drew from the moment that I was able to hold a pencil and just loved drawing when I was really, really small. And so it was kind of one of those things I just never stopped doing. I think part of it is that I'm a born show-off. And you get to the stage where you do something and everybody goes, "Oh, that's amazing." Woo! Usually because it's your parents. And so you do it more. And then I got to school and I was the kid in the class that was quite good at drawing. And again, people sort of make a fuss of you. So you do it more. And I think that was how come I really stuck at it and got really good, because it was something that I always got this wonderful kind of feedback for. So it just fed into that, really. So I did it. And unlike most people, when they get to sort of early teens and they kind of stop drawing because they lose confidence, I just kept going. So yes, I've always done it.
So you trained in printed textile design. So what is that for a start? And sort of how did you get into that? And then what made you change direction?
Well, originally I thought I wanted to be a painter. And I had this kind of rather kind of hazy idea of me somewhere kind of with a furrowed brow, slopping oil paint about. And I did a foundation course and then applied for fine art courses and didn't get taken up. And it's absolutely obvious now why I didn't get taken up, because I was an illustrator. And at the time, fine art courses were very sort of big, abstract, Howard Hodgkins type thing. And so really, I didn't stand a hope in hell, and it was a jolly good job I didn't get in, really, because I would have been miserable. So I hung around for a year, sort of painting and building a portfolio. And then I found this course at Middlesex, which it was a printed textile, so it's basically designing for fabric. So it could be for curtains or it could be for dress, fabrics. But it allowed you to do the most bonkers paintings, anything you want, and then put them in repeat on fabric without any consideration about whether that was actually a commercial thing to do. So I had a fantastic time. I got onto this course because I'd done all this drawing. And I just spent 3 years enjoying myself. And I learned how to screen print fabric, which was really exciting because I'm Diddy. I'm 5'1", and these furnishing fabric screens were as big as I was, and you had to kind of like stroll along with them and whack them down on this huge table and then screen print across down the sort of the length of this long hall. So I just loved it. And then when it came to graduation, I had all these sort of like crazy mad fabrics, but the industry at the time was completely it was knocked off at the knees because it was a huge recession at that time, the recession before this recession. So the textiles industry had virtually gone. And also what there was sort of, you remember Laura Ashley, or the little floral, tiny, weeny little floral things, which couldn't have been more different to what I was doing and interested in. So it was just never going to happen. And I was just really fortunate that because I was making sketchbooks even then, I had the access to screen printing facilities. So I made these lovely fabric jackets for all my sketchbooks and put little illustrations on the front, screen printed on. And I had those lying around underneath the crazy fabrics. And somebody came along and saw that and realised my potential as an illustrator. So although I got not a sniff of interest from textile people, I got this person that came, and it was a real low-level start. It was greetings cards, and it was somebody who it was Royal, which I don't think is even around anymore. But they were really seriously old-fashioned. They were the kind of the mice in the champagne glasses and the kittens on the piano type greetings cards, dreadful stuff, really kind of twee and nasty. And they realised that they were behind the times and they wanted somebody young to relaunch a new range. And so they thought, take a chance, So this person invited me to have a go at designing greetings cards, which I duly did. And looking back, I was dreadful because I had no idea about illustration, of course. But they were really patient, and the woman was so lovely because every now and then she would buy one just to keep me interested, even though they clearly had no interest in ever publishing it. And eventually she kind of showed me enough to get me to produce something that was half decent. And then what I did was produce work for them and then produce work for other greetings cards companies and just kind of work freelance across various people that were around at that time, and learned how to be an illustrator just on the hoof, really. And that's how it began. But I mean, it became really, really boring after a while because, all the most exciting greetings card designs are the ones that are really tiny companies doing quite arty stuff, and they might only produce 12 new cards a year. So even if they love your work, you can't live on one of 12 cards they're going to produce that year. So I had to work for the big companies, the very commercial companies, and so it was trying to think of things to do for boys' birthdays and Valentine's and all of those kind of occasion cards that there's only so many things you can do with a heart. Or Father Christmas, all of that. So after a while, I was just losing the will to live. And so that's when I decided that if I was going to be an illustrator, I was going to try and do something that had a little bit more gravitas and would challenge me a little bit more and be a bit more creative. So that's kind of how I got into illustration. And what I did next was basically editorial. So I was living in London at the time, and that was where all the magazines and newspapers were based. They're not all based there now, but they still mostly are. And so I put together a new portfolio of work illustrating magazine articles that I found, And then I took that around to all the different publishers, editorial publishers, and said, what do you think? And eventually I got somebody who said, oh, yeah, okay, and they gave me a commission. And so then I got a foot in the door. And once you've got something published, it shows, okay, you deliver on time, because there's all of that to worry about. It's not just whether you can do the illustration. It's will you actually answer the brief? Will you kind of get terrified and run away and they'll never hear from you again? Will it come in on time? Will it do what it's supposed to do? And all of those things. So once you're published, it shows that, okay, you're probably reliable, so you'll get more published work. So I gradually built up a client list across a complete range of, everything from sort of the big things that you've heard of, like, the Times Educational Supplement was when I worked for quite a bit, down to trade magazines. There was one called Cement Monthly. And it was one of these things. You go to a publishing house and they have loads of different ones in the foyer that they publish. So you can go, oh, they also do this and they also do this. And so then you phone back and get appointments to see the art directors of all these other trade magazines. So I phoned up the Cement Monthly man, and I said, so what sort of articles do you do? And he said, oh, you'd be surprised how much there is to say about cement.
Yeah.
So,
sounds riveting.
Yeah, exactly. And you'd get these articles, and sometimes accountancy magazines. You got quite a lot of illustration work from them, because what on earth are they going to do? You can't take photographs. And these articles could be deadly and incredibly dense, and you're trying to work out what it's all about, get your head around it, then come up with some kind of witty visual analogy. Pretty much overnight, and then I would have to do a quick rough drawing, and in those days fax it to the publisher, and then they would say yes or no, or change this or don't. And
what was it, like a cement mixer?
Well, yes.
A big old builder with a builder's bum.
Yeah, but it could be quite sort of like tangential stuff. So, for instance, one of the ones I did for the Times Ed was about excluded children. And so I did an illustration of the school gates, and I did the kind of rubbish collectors with this kid in a waste bin on this kind of bin man's back, and the sort of headmaster kind of waving goodbye. So it was kind of taking a slightly funny slant on things, So you had to sort of be incredibly kind of quick-witted, really, because you didn't have long to do this. It was quite a challenge. It was a little bit stressful. You didn't have very long. And then you would send it through, and then you probably had a couple of days to do the artwork and get it back to them. So it was very exciting, and I was sort of like really proud of myself, strutting around London delivering artwork to these very flashy kind of offices and things. I've made it now. But it was not something that I wanted to be doing as I got older. It's a young person's game, that, because also I built up this client list, but people would use you maybe once, or they might use you once a month for 4 months, 6 months if you're lucky. But then they don't want you anymore. They want somebody else, because the magazine needs fresh stuff all the time. So you never really got off the starting blocks. You were always having to take a portfolio around and knock on doors and remind people that you existed, and trying to drum up custom all the time, which, again, incredibly hard work. So I decided I didn't really want to do that forever. But it was brilliant, because it taught me the trade. And so then I decided, okay, what would be a step up from that? And that's when I decided to have a bash at children's books, because it's a much bigger project. And so you actually get longer to think about what you're doing, and you establish relationships with publishers that go on for more than a few weeks. So, you hope that you gradually build a reputation that is a bit more solid. So that's what I did in the end. I gained a completely new portfolio of work. I was very lucky. My husband was a teacher, working basically in further education at that point. And he said, okay, we'll give it a year. Take a year. Don't have to earn anything. You just sort of like build this portfolio and then go out and see what happens. And so I did exactly that. And so it was sort of fairly kind of worrying, because you lose all the contacts you've already got. But it worked out. It took me a little while. I picked up a few kind of just, they're called like rejacketing jobs. So not picture books, which is the kind of the top end of it, but the chapter books that slightly older children read, where they have little black and white illustrations through.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Like the Enid Blyton kind of books.
Yeah, sort of. They're sort of shorter these days and snappier.
Yeah.
But American ones, when they come over here, when they do a UK edition of them, they completely redesign the way they look, particularly the jacket, because the American market is very different to the UK market. And to our eyes, their jackets look quite old-fashioned. And so it's just a very different look. So what they would do is they would get somebody like myself to do a little jacket illustration that kind of they felt was more UK. So I picked up that sort of work to start with, which was a good way of kind of proving that I would deliver. And then eventually I got my first picture book. And it's funny, it's how serendipity works for you. I took a portfolio round. So I was constantly taking portfolios around to publishers. And I went into this picture book art director's office and showed her this portfolio of work. And in there was an illustration that I'd sneaked in from my old work. It was an illustration on serendipity in science. And I can't remember for the life of me what it was all about now, but it was about animals in cages, and science had all gone mad and weird things were happening. And so the rats had turned purple and the dogs were singing. That was my illustration. And they saw this singing dog picture. And it just so happened they'd got a book on their desk that needed an illustrator that was about a singing cat. And it had already been illustrated by somebody, and they weren't very happy with the style of illustration. They didn't feel that it suited the text very well. So they were behind schedule and wondering what on earth to do. And this woman arrives with a picture of some singing dogs. And so they kind of made that connection and went, oh, okay, I bet she could do singing cats. So it's just this mad good luck thing that you get if you hammer away for long enough. Hopefully sooner or later something like that happens. So I got my first picture book, and then I was away. Once you've done one, they then fed me more books. And then eventually I got an agent, and the agent spread me around to different publishers. So basically don't put your eggs in one basket, which was very good advice, because the work from that first publisher didn't dry up, but it slowed down radically after the first few years. So, so that was how I kept going. So it's funny how the kind of route takes you through sort of different places until you kind of find something that you can stick at.
I think art is one of those things, though, isn't it? It is a journey, because it can take you in so many different directions, and you never know where it's going to take you next.
No, exactly. And, if you're a creative, you tend to have sort of thoughts that take you off in new directions. And so if you wanted to kind of grasp hold of those, it's bound to be a ziggy-zaggy journey, really, rather than a straight line.
I was going to ask, what medium were you using at the time? Because obviously, I'm guessing this was before digital.
Yes, and a lot of children's book illustrators don't use digital media anyway. I'm always getting emails from people who want to do children's book illustration, and they ask me what software I use, and they're really worried because they don't know how to use software, and they think they need to learn it. And I'm always able to reassure them that actually learning illustration is a hard enough challenge on its own. You really don't need to layer over the top of that learning this kind of new media if you're not already au fait with it. So it's not necessary to do it digitally. Quite a lot of illustrators actually are still not even techie. We're a funny bunch, actually. Very kind of, we sort of squirrel away often in little studios and just pop our head above every now and then. So no, I don't do it digitally. I only use Photoshop for sort of the boring tasks that you have to do like enlarging things, and when you're trying to work out a difficult design on a page, kind of moving bits about and trying to kind of make it sit, but which I do at just the pencil rough stage. But the artwork has always been in pastels, chalk pastels.
Interesting.
And that's something I started doing when I was doing the editorial. And to begin with, I don't know why I stuck with it. I really don't. I hated pastels when I first started using them because I tried to make them do what paint does.
Right.
And the secret is with changing media is that you have to actually accept that each media is different. So this medium might actually need to do completely different things to paint. And so once I grasped that was the case and stopped trying to force it to do sharp lines, I settled into it. And then I really found that I loved the colour palette that you get with it, which is kind of bright but also subtle at the same time. And I liked the way that you use the chalks in that rather than having to mix up colours, you mix it as you go. You can mix things on the paper. You can layer colours and smudge them in or not smudge them in, and you can leave the marks of your own creation behind on the paper if you want to. It doesn't have to all be smoothed away. And I quite like that, to see the artist's hand there in the mark making. So I once I got used to them, I really loved them. And I've used them ever since. But the big problem with them for children's book work is that artwork, when you finished it, it's taken you, well, it takes me usually about a month to do all the kind of roughing it up, so to design the whole book in pencil. And then it takes me about 2 months to do the coloured artwork. So that artwork is quite precious. There's a lot of kind of sweat and tears and, gritted teeth gone into it. But it's incredibly vulnerable. So you send it off to the publisher and they then have to send it off to a printer, which could be halfway around the world, usually is. And you just have to trust that everybody knows what they're doing and won't touch it and smudge it. And, so it's a nightmare, really. And you can't really fix it properly because the fixatives change the colours. So I was constantly spraying things with fixative and then having to go over it all again because it just looks horrible. Yeah, it's a wonderful medium, but also a complete pain at the same time.
So you got into children's illustration. Did you ever write your own stories?
I have done. I've always loved language, and the two things I was good at school were art and English. They were my sort of like real go-to subjects. So I've always written for fun. And then one day I sort of thought, hang on a minute, I'm missing a trick here. I should have a go at trying to write these myself. And I did. And every now and then I got lucky and managed to write something that went all the way through the process. But I found the writing part of it, not the actual writing, which I enjoyed, but the getting it accepted part of it, so incredibly stressful that in the end I decided to stop doing that. Because when I'm commissioned to do the illustrations, I'm only approached when the publisher is 100% happy with the text. The editor's already worked with the author until they consider it to be perfect. It's all contracted. It's going to happen. They've chosen me. I'm the one. So unless I do something really bad, it's going to go and I'm going to get paid for everything I do from that moment on.
Did you ever think of self-publishing then?
No, and I know it's not what a lot of people would like to hear, but I would seriously dissuade anyone from self-publishing picture books because, well, there's so many reasons. One reason is that it's a team job for a reason. You might be good at illustration, but without the benefit of the rest of the team, you probably aren't going to edit the text properly. You probably aren't going to design the book properly. You probably haven't got the faintest idea how to market it. The front cover will probably not be something that will sell. There's so many reasons why it's likely to bomb. And then even if you get all that right, you're trying to compete with these humongous companies that have got this massive marketing machine behind them. And even they struggle. And so it's really, really difficult to even make your money back, let alone make anything out of it. And because it's such a big job to do a picture book, because it takes so very long, you really don't want to be doing that for nothing.
No, and I imagine the illustrating takes an awful lot longer than the writing.
Well, it's interesting. In an obvious way it does, because, 3 months of my time sat literally full-time working on it. Whereas if you're an author, because it's a very short test, you can rattle one off. But actually writing it is a lot more difficult than it appears from the length of the text. And there's so many challenges. You have to take a child on a reasonably sophisticated journey, which has to be a bit of an emotional roller coaster so that it feels satisfying. But you have to do it in this terribly short amount of words. And you have to have an end that is sufficiently satisfying, which is one of the hardest things of all, I think. And you have to pace it right so that when you illustrate it and when you read it, everything, like a book, it goes up, it goes down, you have peaks and troughs. You have to get that. You can't have loads of things happening in the first half that an illustrator can't possibly cram in, and then everything taking place in the same place in the second half. So it's really visually boring. So there's quite a lot that you have to think about, as well as what the trends are at the moment. So I was forever writing texts that you take them to a publisher and they'd fall off their seat laughing, this is wonderful, but I'm afraid we're looking for things for the 3 to 5 year old brackets at the moment. And this is very much, 5 to 7. That sort of thing used to happen all the time. So it's quite a hard thing to do. So that's why if people email me and ask me for advice, I always try in the most tactful way possible to say, please, don't put loads of money into this. Only spend what you can afford to lose.
Yeah, I think that is important. But you are able to draw things out of your imagination, obviously, without any reference, I presume. So a lot of artists I know would struggle with that. So do you think that that's a skill that can be learned? Do you have any tips for that?
The big tip is always going to be the same. Drawing. Just draw all the time and then draw more, really. You might be surprised to find out that I actually have a condition called aphantasia, which means that I don't have a visual memory.
Really?
So that, and it's not uncommon in artists, I've discovered. And it varies in the strength of it. Some people literally see a black screen when they close their eyes. They see no pictures at all. What I see is as if I'm trying to look at something through my peripheral vision. So I have a sense that it's there, so I can see it, sort of. But as soon as I try and actually look at it and look for any kind of detail, it evaporates like a dream. So it's very frustrating. So if I need to draw a bicycle, I need to get a picture of a bicycle. No chance. I can't bring up into I could have drawn a bicycle a lot of times and I'd still need that help. Although I find drawing something, I think you store it in a different part of your brain. So I have more chance of actually accessing a picture if I've already drawn it. But so I do need reference to certain kinds of things. But what I can do without reference is draw animate things rather than inanimate things. So if I want to have a stab at, a dog dancing ballet, I can certainly do a passable sketch that will hang right, it'll balance right, it'll not look as though it's falling over backwards, because that's just practice at drawing. And I might need to then go away and look at different kinds of dogs and to make it look like a recognisable dog. But I can get that basic sketching to capture the kind of the funny things, the ideas that I have that are not fully formed images, but I can sort of see them as they run through my head when I read a book. I can capture them more quickly because I have that strong foundation of drawing. And that's the main thing, really, is being able to grab thoughts before they disappear on you. But there's nothing wrong with reference. I think the big problem with reference is you mustn't copy. You have to, for instance, if you're doing a drawing of a dog or a bicycle, get pictures of dogs and bicycles, maybe draw from dogs and bicycles, but then put the reference away and do it from memory. And then what happens is you don't remember all the detail that you don't need, all the stuff that makes it look really stiff and not very picture booky. All of that tends to disappear and you remember the important things. And so that would be my hot tip for trying to use reference.
Really good tip. Yeah.
Yeah.
Really
And it just, for me anyway, that works so well. So I want to draw a giraffe. I take good look at pictures of giraffes, do sketches, then put it all away. And then I find I can draw giraffes that are simplified enough to look decent in a picture book.
So you've just given us one tip about creating characters, but if someone wants to learn more, you've got an online course, haven't you, for character design?
Yes, I have. I had a really exciting kind of mad opportunity that just fell in my lap. Somebody recommended me for a company that was then called Craftsy and is now been bought out and is now called My Blueprint, which is BLU. So My BLU Print. And they're at myblueprint.com if anybody wants to have a look. And they're a company based in Denver in America that make these quite upmarket how-to films across the range of arts and crafts. And so they needed somebody to do book illustration. And so I was recommended. So they flew me to Denver. It was so exciting. Yeah. And I was like, really? and I had 3 days in a proper recording studio with this proper team of professionals that were just mine for the 3 days. And I talked about basically everything I could possibly think of that I have learned over the years about how to create characters for picture book illustration. Because I think that's a kind of my unique selling point. That's what I'm particularly good at, is making, you've got a picture book with a badger in it. How do you make him look like a frustrated badger or an envious badger or a badger who's a bit of a nerd and makes, airfix spells and never comes out of his bedroom? How do you do that? How do you make him look a particular badger so that we believe in him and love him? And so that's the kind of stuff that I share, and how you draw characters very simply from quite simple shapes to get you started. And then you embellish that rather than starting at the top and trying to create a really lovely badger, from his ears down to his toes. That just isn't the easiest way to do it. So all of that stuff. And yeah, so it's in a series of lessons. So it's this kind of masterclass. I'm trying to remember how many lessons it is now. I think it's about seven films. And you sign up for a subscription to Blueprint, which means you can not only access mine, but you can access all these other films on drawing and painting. There's loads of urban sketching people on there. All the people that people will have heard of are on there. And there's also other things like knitting and sewing and cooking. And so it's all very high end. So unlike YouTube, where it's a bit of a mixed bag and you're never quite sure if the advice you're getting is reliable or not, these are all professional people, or people at least that are at the top of their game. And the films are really well made. So I made these films and had a wonderful, wonderful time and learned all about how that works. And then I came home again, and it was like I'd been in some kind of crazy dream.
That's amazing. That's absolutely amazing. I heard that you've got over 200 sketchbooks at home.
Yes.
So how important then, because that's amazing, first of all, but how important then do you think regular sketching is for an artist, or in particular an illustrator?
Well, I think it's very important because you need to learn the craft of drawing before you learn the bolt-on craft of whatever it is you're going to do with it.
Yeah.
So if you
like
can't
a foundation,
draw,
isn't it?
Exactly. It's almost impossible if you can't draw to be an illustrator of any kind, or, a lot of other things that use drawing as a foundation. So you should do that anyway, but you should really want to do it if that's what you want to do. I would have thought people are doing it anyway, but it underpins everything else. And if you want to get good at drawing, if you want to be a sketcher and get the joy of sitting out, in the park, drawing trees and people and cars and whatever it is that rocks your boat, and be able to do it in a way that pleases you, so that you're not just kind of gritting your teeth and going, damn it. The only way is practice. The only way is practice. But it works like a magic trick. I do a lot of work with schools, and I always show them a sketchbook. And I usually try and do a drawing on the train on my way into the school, so that I can say, hey, look, I just did this before the day even started, and they all go, whoa, really? And then I talk to them about the fact that practice is like a magic trick. It really doesn't matter what it is. If you want to be a trapeze artist, you just do the same thing over and over, and you can't actually help getting good at it. And it's definitely the case with drawing. I run sketch crawls, or I did run sketch crawls. I have to correct that because I've just handed the group over to someone else in Sheffield. And I had somebody who came to me unable to draw, but just liked the idea of drawing. And she'd been signed off work for a year because she'd had a nervous breakdown. And the doctor said to her, find something that you can absorb yourself in, something that will feed your creative side and will take you away from sort of the black thoughts, presumably, that she was having. And she thought, okay, I'm going to learn to sketch. And so she came along to a sketch crawl, and she really enjoyed it. But she was rubbish, of course. She's not, she hadn't drawn before. Why wouldn't she be? But it didn't put her off. She was that sort of a personality. And so she just stuck at it, and she went to every single sketch crawl she could get her hands on. She bought loads of different art materials to try them all out. And she just drew and drew and drew and drew. And over the course of that year, her sketchbooks were like this kind of lesson in how to use practice to master something. And by the end of the year, she was really good. And she could lay her hand to drawing anything she fancied. And
fantastic.
And it was fantastic, actually, just looking at, God, yeah, it really does work. So just don't be off-put by, it not being brilliant to start with. You wouldn't expect to pick up a clarinet and be able to just launch into music. So why do you expect that you can do that with sketching?
Exactly.
You've got to learn it. People think it's a gift. When I'm out sketching, people often come along and say, oh, you're so lucky to have such an amazing gift. And I know that it's meant kindly. So I always smile and say, oh, thank you. But inside, I'm like going, because I'm going, this is 50 years of practice.
Yeah, exactly. It is all about practice, isn't it? And do you, when you look back at, because you've got 200 sketchbooks, so do you ever look back on your own work from perhaps, I don't know, even 5 years ago to now, and then compare? Are you continuously evolving and improving?
Yes. I think part of my personality is that I don't like to stand still. I never like to do the same things. I don't have a favourite restaurant that I go to all the time. I don't have a favourite place that I go on holiday. I don't really do that. I like to try. There's so much out there to try. I want to go to a different restaurant every single time and on holiday to a different place every single time. So that is actually in my artwork. So I find that after I've used a certain medium for a certain amount of time, I want to try something new. Or if I see someone else doing amazing things with whatever, it's like, oh my God, I want to try that. So my sketchbooks evolve through different things that I'm trying out. And one of the huge, huge turning points for me was when I got invited to join Urban Sketchers. I don't know if everybody that's listening will know what Urban Sketchers is. If you don't, and you like drawing, especially if you like sketching real stuff that's out there, just go online and look up urbansketchers.org, because you will have your mind blown. It's this international charitable organisation, and they have grown. I think I joined them in 2008. And they were quite new at that point. It was an idea that somebody called Gabby Campanario, who lived in America, in Seattle. And he suddenly realised that there were other people like him that like going out sketching, but we all do it on our own. And he thought, it might be a quite interesting thing to try and pull all these people out of the woodwork. So he started to look online to find, because this was in the early days of posting your stuff online. And so he started to look online to see who he could find. And he invited people specifically from different countries all around the world. And he put together, I think it was 100 that he put together, different people from all around the world who he invited to join this kind of experimental ship to go off and see what we could discover. And I was incredibly honoured that he found me. And the reason he found me was because I was doing a lot of this work in schools at the time, doing my children's books. And because I don't drive, I was on a train quite a lot. And I suddenly realised that when you're a sketcher and you're sat on the train, you're surrounded by free life models. And I started to take a sketchbook and I started to draw the people on the train. But at that time, which is why this is a very long answer to a short question, but at that time, I was using a 3B pencil. And what I did was I had a pencil case full of about a dozen pre-sharpened 3B pencils, so I didn't have to stop and waste time sharpening, because when you're drawing somebody, they can get up at any moment. And so I could just keep swapping out new pencils. And that was my kit. And those were what I was posting. And so he saw me and he invited me to join. And so I went on, of course, to have a look at what was going on. And I realised that all these other people were sketching in colour. And I thought, oh my God, what am I doing? And at one time I used to take out coloured pencils, but it was very much, they were a big heavy tin of coloured pencils, and it was like, I'm going out drawing today kind of thing, rather than sketching things off, as you go. But I saw people using watercolour, and I'd never been able to paint. And I'd never learned how to use watercolour. And every time you get a book on how to use watercolour, it's all about stretching paper and laying layers down. And it's all very complicated and, slow. And I'm incredibly impatient. And I couldn't be doing with any of that. So I never painted with watercolour. And then I saw this stuff. And there's all these people they're not doing any of that. They're just chucking paint at the paper and drawing all over it. And I thought, oh my God, you can do that. It's allowed. So I started to experiment with watercolours. And from the moment I joined Urban Sketchers, I started to draw in colour, either using watercolours, or the other thing I discovered was something that I still use all the time is Derwent Inktense pencils. Because on a train, you can't really be using watercolours. It's a bit of a kind of a faff, and you don't want to be tipping paint all over anybody or paint water. So I used these pencils, which were they're watercolour pencils, but they're not like watercolour pencils you've ever used before. They're sort of like watercolour pencils on acid, They're just so like, and they're called ink tens for a reason.
I've got some. They are amazing.
They are wonderful, aren't they? And the thing that really excited me about them is when I've had sets of watercolour pencils and I just never use them. Because when you put the water on, it washes the mark making away. But with these, the mark making was there to stay. And so I could get the marky drawings I like to do, but I could also get the effects of watercolour. And I could do it all with a water brush on a train really easily. That was why Urban Sketchers really changed my sketchbooks. So I can look through my 200 sketchbooks and see a really distinct line, the pre-Urban Sketches and the post-Urban Sketches, because all the pre-stuff, I used to go away on holiday with 3B pencils and usually quite small sketchbooks. And then suddenly the sketchbooks get much more exciting. I'm trying out different formats and I'm trying out all these different media.
Wow. So how does the sort of process for doing urban sketching, how does that differ from illustration?
It's a completely different thing for me. They've always been completely separate. People often say, do you use all these sketchbooks in your illustration? And I don't at all. When I'm doing a sketch, my best work is always done very quickly. And I've sort of evolved techniques now that kind of help that. And so it's, for me, the process is all about looking really carefully at the same time as I'm recording. So I don't do any kind of sketch setup stuff, drawing lines, underdrawing or any of that, because I find that quite boring. By the time I've done that, I'm not interested in the sketch anymore.
Well, it loses spontaneity as well, doesn't it?
It does. So for me, it's all about hand-eye coordination and about finding techniques that help me to explore something as I go along. And also, if I make a mistake, are a little bit fudgeable. So there's all sorts of really major gaffes in a lot of my sketches. But if a sketch is beautiful or exciting, if it's got that vibrancy, people don't notice and they don't care. And that is another huge tip, really, that I want to put out there. It's much, much better to do a visually exciting drawing sketch that has got mistakes in it, where the perspective's a bit iffy or people are too small, than it is to do a much more accurate sketch that is dull and stiff. So just, people don't want to be afraid of making mistakes, because you'll never get that vibrancy if you worry too much about that. So that could not be a more different process to illustration, where it's very much about not making mistakes. It's very much about process, about me drawing things and drawing them again, trying different layouts. Each character I use, I draw several different times. I try different ways of making them work. Everything is laboriously drawn and drawn and drawn. I send them off to the publishers when I think they're right, and then the publisher sends them back to me and says, yeah, I like this, but don't like that. Change this. So they're redrawn again before you ever get to colour them. So really, really different process.
Sketching, I think, is probably more fun. Do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. It is more fun. And I kind of realised at a certain point that I was really good after years of doing it at children's book illustration, but I wasn't enjoying it as much as I should be. And when I was out sketching, I was so much more in the moment and having so much more fun. And it kind of pointed up something that I hadn't really noticed before. Yeah, okay, this is probably one of the reasons that I'm not enjoying it as much as I should. That process suits a particular personality type, and I'm just not that person. I'm not into methodical, laborious, repetitious, all my work had to repeat the same style because that's what sells. That's what I'm being commissioned to do. I can't go off on a kind of flight of fancy and decide I want to try something different. So it was very, very controlled. And so it didn't actually suit me one bit. So I have now finished doing children's books. I stopped doing them about 3 years ago because I kind of had this epiphany, realised actually I should be doing something different.
Well, you wrote a book, didn't you? A really good book called Sketching People. So for a beginner who wants to draw people from life, do you have some tips that you could share, apart from buying your book, obviously, which we will put a link to on. We'll put a link
Actually,
to your book later.
I don't make any money from the book. Like most of the sketching books, they're published by publishers that they're called packaging publishers, and they put together the book and then sell it on to other publishers. So you get a flat fee, not royalties.
Right.
But that being said, the more people that read the book and enjoy it, the better, as far as I'm concerned. So great. Yeah, it's full of, again, like I did with the video thing, with the illustration, I just sat down and tried to think, which is quite hard actually, of all the things I knew, because you forget what you know. When you've been doing something for a long time and you get good at it, it's quite hard to set your mind back to being a beginner and not knowing the basic things. So it took me quite a long time to think of all the different places where I had to really begin at the beginning and then bring it through different kinds of things that I knew and took for granted. And so I just filled it with just everything I could possibly think of that I thought would help. And the publisher were really useful because they'd done a lot of those kinds of projects before. So it would have been a very different book if I'd have self-published it. And they persuaded me to do a lot of things that I thought, I don't really want to do that. But actually, in hindsight, looking at the complete book, were absolutely the right thing to do. So that's again what I was saying earlier. It's a team thing. You need to know when other people actually have more experience than you and are giving you good advice and listen. So yeah, it was then they helped me to organise it all, and this is how I know how many sketchbooks I've got, because I had to go through them all. The most difficult bit of writing the book was sourcing the right drawings for each point and finding where on earth they were in which sketchbooks. And it took me ages to work out a system, because you don't even know what you've got. So you write this stuff, and then you need to talk about how to draw noses or whatever. You need to find the right sketch, and you don't even know what it is you're looking for. So it was so difficult to work out how you find the things that might be useful, how you tag them with an appropriate teaching point, and then you store them in a way that means you're able to find them later when you've written that bit of text. And you can choose between maybe the 5 things that show you how to do a certain thing, So, but doing that like times 100 with all the different, well, more than that, different teaching points. So I had to number all my sketchbooks in order to do this. And it was an absolute nightmare. And I had piles of sketchbooks in numerical order all over the house. With little tags in them with like other numbers on all these little bookmarks that were in there, and we had to go around and use a mobile phone to photograph all the different images, because it was the quickest way, that were in a sketchbook, and then sort of upload them so that I could see them quickly without having to find the sketchbook. But I had to have the sketchbook numbered so I'd know where they were if I wanted them, So yeah, so that's how I know that I've got 200 sketchbooks. But it was actually really, really interesting to do. I thoroughly enjoyed doing it, because it got me to write, which I love. But it also, again, was a brand new exploring thing that was just taking me out of everything I knew and showing me a whole new way of doing stuff. But yeah, seriously, if people want, not to blow my own trumpet, but if people are struggling with drawing people, there's so much stuff in there. There's so many different approaches to the problem. and different ways of demystifying it. And, there are tips that make it a lot easier than you think it will be. So yeah, give it a look. Hope it helps.
So I know you mentioned before that you use Inktense for your urban sketching now. What other kit do you use, and what would you suggest for a beginner as well?
Well, my biggest tip, if you're a beginner sketcher, is don't put everything you might want to use in a wheelie suitcase and trundle it around with you. I actually did meet somebody once at Sketchful who did exactly that. And apart from the fact that you can hardly move, when you want to draw, you've got all this stuff, all these choices to make. And so it's actually quite difficult to begin. So I think travelling light is a really good idea. And I think start simple. I would start with a line tool that you can't easily rub out. So something like a 3B, 4B graphite stick. So as you get a lovely strong line that if you try and rub it out, you get in a bit of a mess. So it will stop you trying to rub out all the time. Or an ink line, which is even scarier, really. And explore how to make beautiful, fluid lines. One of the things when I do workshops, I always start with is 1 minute blind contour drawings with something like a graphite stick, so that you poke it through a bit of paper that's just a few inches, a square that's maybe 2 by 2, and you draw without being able to see what you're looking at. And you cannot help, if you do that, making lovely fluid lines, because if you take your pencil off, you've no idea where you are. So you have to leave it on the paper, and you have to be quick, because there's no point in not being, really. You can finish a drawing in 30 seconds quite easily. So again, it's a really good way of getting fast practice in. So I would seriously recommend experimenting in that way, but take something that'll give you recourse to colour. Maybe not start with watercolour, because that's quite terrifying. It doesn't need to be, and you can find ways to make that not terrifying, but not as a beginner. I would just take maybe 4 or 5 colours with you and just colour the odd thing that you sketch. You don't have to reproduce real colour. That was another thing that was like, oh my God, you can change the colours. Oh yeah. And once you realise that, and you realise, the Simpsons are yellow. You don't have to do realistic colour either. You can do all sorts of crazy stuff. And so long as it's exciting and you're looking at the way the page is evolving as a design and you're making it a sort of an interesting drawing, you can do all sorts of stuff. So don't take everything but the kitchen sink. Just try out a few art materials at a time. And go out and use them, every day for a week. And then if you hate them, try something else, and just find what are the right things for you. I take out a little zipper bag. It's a little toiletries bag. And it's only, I think it's about 8 inches by 5 inches by 2. And I have a whole range of stuff in there that is honed right down. And I've got everything I need. And so I can put it in a large handbag or rucksack, and you can take it everywhere then. And you don't have to plan a day of sketching. You can carry it if you've gone out on the sort of day where you might have time. And then when you see something you fancy, you can whip it out, which is by far the best way to sketch, in my opinion.
So do you ever get noticed by the people you're drawing? And if you do, how exactly do you handle it?
It's a question that I'm often asked, and I'm often asked if I ask permission, and I never ever ask permission. You don't want to ask permission, because once people know what you're doing, they don't act naturally anymore. So they'll sit up straight. They'll show you their best side. So the sketch you get doesn't look natural. What you want is body language. You want the way people slump when they're reading a book. The way they stand when they're texting on their phone. So you don't ask permission, and you try not to be seen. But they do, inevitably, they do spot you. And there are sort of ways that you can try and get around that for a bit longer. So you can look at the person next to them on a train. People are very close together. If you see somebody make eye contact with you that you're drawing, just really quickly look at the person next to them and pretend to draw them for a while. And then they'll go, oh, okay, it's not me after all. And they'll go back to what they were doing. So that does work sometimes. Some people wear, caps with a peak so that they can hide their eyes a bit more. But ultimately, they'll probably can see you if you do it for any length of time. And it's not the worst thing that's going to happen. That's the thing you need to know, that most people, it falls into two categories. They either are it's so outside their life experience because they're not arty themselves. So they've never seen anybody kind of draw, certainly not them anyway, and probably not seen anybody draw at close quarters, that they just can't quite believe it. So they're sort of mystified. and they're a bit like, they feel a bit weird about kind of approaching you because they don't kind of understand it. And so you know that they've noticed, but they pretend that they haven't. And you both collude in this pretense that neither of you know what's going on, which is really quite interesting. So it's either that, or they generally get very excited because most people have never been drawn. And they're interested. And even if what you think you've done isn't that good, the chances are the person you're drawing can't draw. And so they'll think it's good. And they certainly think it's interesting. And they come and they say hello and it becomes quite a nice experience. They often take photos on their phone to show their partner. And it's quite a magical sort of random contact with complete strangers that you have that can actually be really lovely if you only let it in, rather than sort of go and try not to kind of make any kind of visual contact with people. I actually really enjoy that part of sketching. So try not to worry so much. It would, again, be another hot tip, really. I think I've only once had somebody object. And that's out of thousands of people that I've drawn. So the overwhelming chance is that it's going to be fine.
And you actually make a living from sketching now, don't you? Whereas you obviously used to make a living from illustrating children's books. So how did that change come about? And what is it that you do exactly?
Well, do you remember I said that I stopped doing the children's books because I realised I didn't enjoy it anymore? One of the reasons that I was able to do that was because, again, one of these wonderful things fell in my lap. It was, I suppose, in a way, it's, what's the word for that when you put out good stuff and good stuff comes back to you?
Karma?
Karma. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. That's the word I'm looking for. I think it's karma in a way, because I ran this urban sketching group, gave up a day a month, for 10 years, every month. And, I enjoyed doing it. I didn't mind doing it at all. And I saw it as a very useful thing because all these people that weren't sketchers loved sketching if they were in a group because they felt safe. And it grew into this really successful thing, which was lovely. So I didn't mind it at all. But I gave up all this free time. And unbeknown to me, a couple came along to a few of my sketch crawls, and one of them was an artist and her partner didn't draw at all but came along just to have a go, and she happened to be a professor at Manchester University. And anyway, they came and then they never came again, and I completely forgot that they existed. But this professor had obviously remembered that experience, and she got this funding opportunity that crossed her desk. And she thought, that might be interesting. And what it was a Leverhulme Trust at that time. Anyway, they've stopped doing it now, unfortunately. They were giving residency funding for 10-month residencies that were about an artist of any kind. You could be a poet or you could be a dancer or whatever. So long as you were an artist and you worked with an organisation that had nothing whatsoever to do with the arts, and you kind of twinned yourself together to see what would happen. That was the only criteria. So you could put together a bid to do anything you like. And if they liked the sound of it, they would give you the money. Obviously, there were only so many places a year. So we put in to do this because the department that she was the director of was called the Morgan Centre for Research into Everyday Lives. And they were a bunch of sociologists. And she'd made the connection that what she was interested in researching, this kind of everyday stuff, the minutiae that kind of you don't even notice a lot of the time, was exactly the stuff that I enjoyed drawing. And we were recording the same things in different ways. So she thought that would make for a really interesting thing to do together. So we put in for the money and we're both astonished that we got it. And so I had this wonderful opportunity to go to the university 2 days a week. And I just couldn't believe that somebody was going to pay me to draw whatever I liked that was going on in this department. You know, basically I was painting a picture of what they did. So I could draw the students, I got into the offices of the members of staff, and I sat in meetings, and I went to conferences, and I sat alongside lots of different researchers on research projects when they were doing interviews. So I learned all this exciting stuff, and it was absolutely brilliant. I thoroughly enjoyed myself, not just because it was the drawing, but because, again, it was a whole new world that I'd stepped into and all this new stuff that I learned. So I had a lovely time, and I realised at that point, this is what I should be doing. I'm a people person. I shouldn't be sat in a room on my own. And luckily for me, after I'd finished that residency, various researchers that I'd worked with that were part of the Morgan Centre, they liked the idea of the sketching of the research. And so they put me into new bids that they were putting in. And they were only small bids. So it was like I might get 4 days of sketching, you know. But I got bits and pieces. And I also made contact with York University because they came along to a few things that the Morgan Centre ran, because they were another bunch of sociologists. And so they saw me in action and went, that's interesting. So they put me in onto bids as well. So I started to get work from them as well. And so it seemed like it was a model that might be sustainable. And so I thought, do you know what? I'm just going to go with it. So I stopped doing the books and I just crossed my fingers. And I don't get constant work, far from it, but they pay me a lot better for my time than picture book publishers ever did. It's dreadfully paid being a picture book illustrator. So actually, although I work a lot less, I don't earn the same that I did from the picture books, but it's not massively less. It's enough with what John's now pulling a pension, so between us, it's fine. And so I'm able to do this. And I got the most extraordinary thing. I went to Australia. I got contacted by another professor and director of a research centre in Perth, in Western Australia. And she had just won all this money to set up a research centre and thought, let's celebrate with an artist in residence for a year. Sorry, not for a year, for 2 months. And invited me to go. So I got to go to Perth and again, do the same thing, do what I would have done without being paid, And that was even better in a way because they were psychologists rather than sociologists, and they were work design specialists. And so they took me into different workplaces all over Western Australia. So they took me into offices and call centres and kind of what we might think were ordinary jobs. But they also flew me to one of these huge open cast mines. and I got to sketch a hand surgeon at work. I did all sorts of really bizarre and interesting things. They have this long distance school because there's such big spaces in Western Australia. There are kids that are in the middle of super nowhere that can't go to school, so they have to have this like online school. I do remember vaguely from my youth remembering things like Skippy. I bet half the people that are listening won't remember Skippy, but it was a television program from Australia, and I think I remembered this online school from even back then. So it's been around a long time. But all these kids kind of do this online thing, and the teacher comes and they got like a huge screen with all these little kids all up on it, all in different places all over Western Australia, kind of coming into a lesson. So I got to go and watch that and draw it, and so it was absolutely amazing. Sheep shearing. I drew sheep shearing gags. What's not to laugh? It's fantastic. So yeah, I'm seriously having the best time in the world, as you can probably tell at the moment.
Yeah, amazing.
And even if I get no more sketching research work ever again, I've had the best time. So yeah, fantastic.
Well, it's completely different to that, but I know you've also got a YouTube channel.
Yes.
I don't know if you filmed anything about your Australia on your YouTube channel.
No, I didn't. There's the difficulties with the YouTube channel is trying to get professional looking films when you're doing it yourself in the attic.
Yeah.
It's very difficult. And they don't look too bad in the circumstances. But I've not done one for ages for that reason. However, that's not to say that if you're interested in learning more about either book illustration or sketching, that you wouldn't be interested in them, because they're still just as relevant, even though I've not made one for maybe 5 years. There's loads of films I've made all about the different processes involved in the different aspects of doing the children's books. I've had, films made of me kind of sketching out on location. So there's quite a lot of stuff there. So yeah, take a look, see if you like it. I find being filmed while I'm sketching actually really stressful. I didn't think I would. I was quite blasé.
Pressure, isn't it?
God, yeah. Suddenly when you're on camera, it's like, oh my God. So, yeah.
Stiffen up. Yeah, I find that as well. You kind of have to sort of stiffen up almost, as if, I don't know, it's kind of, yeah, I know exactly what you mean. Your sketches are available on merchandise as well, aren't they? Can you tell us a little bit about that, where people can find these things?
Yeah, that is a totally new thing that just literally a couple of weeks ago has happened. Somebody is making a business out of putting urban sketching, mainly urban sketching, onto various things like T-shirts and phone cases, cushions, and various different things. And she contacted me to ask if I fancied giving it a go. And I thought, well, all the sketches are already done. I might as well try it. So what she's done is she's taken one of my sketches for the moment to see how they go. And if people order them, then there'll be more, basically. So at the moment, there's only one of my sketches available because it's so new. And I gave her a few to choose from, and I'm so glad she chose this one. It's a really old fire engine from the 50s that I did on a sketch crawl to a museum in Sheffield. And it's just so cute, this lovely red fire engine. So that is there if you want to take a look. It's called Studio 56, as in numbers, so Studio 56 boutique.com. And so there's not just mine there, there's all sorts of other stuff as well. So, have a look. Yeah. They're based in Canada, so the only problem for the UK is obviously the postage racks up the price of things a little bit. But, it depends on your disposable income, I suppose. But yeah, certainly have a look.
So what other plans have you got for the future?
Well, definitely trying to get as much of the research sketching as I can. to see if that's something that I can keep doing. But I've also, because this has released a bit more time, because when I was doing the children's books, as I said, I've got 3 months solid in a room. There's no space for anything else. Suddenly, in between these sketching jobs, I've got time. So I've explored something else that came just, I was saying about these creative shifts. I just had this idea for going back to textiles, but not really the type of textiles that I trained in, which was obviously the screen printing. I just got the urge to have a go at drawing in hand stitching. And I started just playing around with some of my sketches and thinking, well, what would it be like? So I've never redraw any of my sketches or do paintings from them, because it's like, what's the point? You never get anything as good as the first thing you did because it lacks that life. But I thought, if I interpret them in a completely different medium, it'll be something new. It won't just be a rework of the sketch. So I started to experiment with random sketches, and it looked really interesting, and I've really enjoyed it. And so I then started to experiment with other things, and I had a landscape drawing that I'd done that was sort of semi-abstract, and I had to go at that, and that looked really interesting because it was already slightly abstracted. So when I then did the textiles, it was like, oh, even more abstracted. And then I got so excited by the mark making itself that I left the sketches behind, and I realised they didn't have to be recognisable pictures at all. I could just play and just make stuff that was visually interesting out of different kinds of marks. So I've been using a lot of organza, synthetic organza, because it's so sheer. But if you layer it, you get almost like the effect of watercolour, because you get these very, very delicate colours that can be layered up, and they get rich where they're layered up, but they're almost invisible where they're not. And you can rough cut all the edges so you get soft edges, and then you can stitch underneath, in between, on top, and it's just really interesting. And then I've tried painting as well on it, and I even did one with a bit of oil pastels as well in the mix, and just created all this stuff. And the more I did, the more excited I got with it. And I think it's because I've done a little bit of self-analysis here. I think it's because when I was doing the children's books, I used to have the sketching that was the other. So the children's books was work, and the sketching was the I can do anything I want, this is play thing. And now the sketching has moved into the work category. I think I needed something that was radically different to be the I've no idea what I'm doing here play thing. And I think that's why it's taken such a hold on me, because it's another start from scratch, anything's possible sort of thing. And so much so that I've started making sculptures. I've never made anything 3D in my life. And all of a sudden, I got this urge to make shapes. And believe it or not, I'm building things out of plastic carrier bags that I'm stitching into. And it's just bonkers, but it's such fun. So, that's why I really have no idea where my future goes, because I don't know. It may be something that will be, I've been doing it for 2 years, 2.5. So it may peter out and I'll lose interest in it, or it may be something that grows and grows and I do as much fine art as I do sketching. I don't know, but I just love the idea of taking yourself in these different directions and just running with it and playing, because I don't think we do enough playing. I really don't. I think that's why sketching is so popular, because it's a play thing, which is why you can't be taking it too seriously. Take it too seriously, you kill that. It needs to be fun and light, and you need to not worry about the end results. I know it's easily said, and I'm the same as everybody else. If it's not going well, I get seriously grumpy. But what you have to keep reminding yourself of is that when you were 6, you drew for the joy of drawing, and you were only very marginally interested in the finished drawing. You know, Mum might take it and put it on the fridge, but by then you've moved on. You're not that excited about that. You enjoy the process of drawing and just having fun and making marks and playing with colour. And then suddenly we kind of get to about 10 and we start getting real hang-ups about, does it look like reality? You know, are people going to judge me? Am I any good? And from that moment on, loads of people stop drawing. And even those of us that don't have these huge hang-ups about, is this any good or not? And we need to get our heads back by whatever means we can to that 6-year-old mentality of, so what? What's the worst that can happen? It's absolute rubbish. So who cares? I had a really great time for 20 minutes playing around.
Find your inner child. Find your inner child, I think that's what we need to do.
Absolutely, we really do. So, yeah, I think that again is central to what I believe in, and when it comes to urban sketching and to really art in general, to be honest.
So where can people find out a bit more about you and your work?
Well, if you Google me, I've been around a while, as you could probably tell from the 50 years of practice. If you Google me...
And the 200 sketchbooks.
Absolutely. I'm going to come up. I've got now the embarrassing situation where I've now got 3 websites, because I've got one for the children's books. Then when I started to kind of work with the urban sketching, I thought, I need an urban sketching one. So I set up an urban sketching website. And then suddenly I started to produce all this textile stuff, and I thought, well, you know, I need to do something with it. Let's get it out there. So I just very, very recently launched a website that's got some of that on. So there's now 3 different Lynne Chapman websites. So if you're seriously interested, lynnechapman.co.uk is the first one, the children's books. lynnechapman.net is the urban sketching and the research sketching one. And then lynnechapmantextiles.co.uk is the new one. And my name is spelled with 2 N's and an E. And you might, if you Google it, come up with a belly dancer. There's a belly dancer.
Is that
called
you
Lynne
as well?
Chapman. No, it's not. Another good way to play, I should think, actually.
Well, it's creative, that's for sure.
Yeah.
That's so true.
Well, thank you so much. It's been so lovely talking to you. It's fascinating hearing all about your life.
Oh, thank you. No, it's been really fun talking to you. Yeah,
and we'll put links to all of the various things that you've told us, like the books and the all your social media and things on our show notes as well. So we can check you out. Yeah, it's been fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for taking the time to listen to me ramble on.
Brilliant. Take care then.
Okay, thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you so much for listening. We hope you enjoyed the episode, and if you did, perhaps you'd like to share it and leave a review for us on iTunes.